Welcome back to some new r/PettyRevenge stories, where people share small victories over those who wronged them. I hope you had a great day. Thanks for all the likes and comments on the last video. And now, let's start with the first story. It's called Keyboard Revenge. My HR coworker had a habit of overworking 2 interns unnecessarily, which I really didn't appreciate. It felt like she was on a bit of a bossy power trip, and it rubbed me the wrong way. So before Thanksgiving break, I decided to play a harmless prank to send a little message. I carefully removed the keys from her keyboard and placed small pieces of damp tissue underneath as a base. Then I planted alfalfa seeds in the spaces and gently put the keys back in place. Over the next few days, the seeds sprouted, and by the time she returned from Thanksgiving vacation, her keyboard looked like a tiny alfalfa farm. When she saw it, she was completely shocked and, let's just say, not thrilled. She couldn't believe what had happened and ended up telling everyone in the office about it. To my surprise, people found it hilarious. Even the old janitor chimed in, saying something along the lines of, "Maybe it's because we already know you are kind of difficult." After that day, she toned down the power trip and treated the interns a lot better. Mission accomplished, humorously and harmlessly. The next story is called Impossible. My wife worked for a company for a couple of years, and during that time, a lady I had dealt with in my previous job as a deputy started working there. Let's call her Dina. I warned my wife that Dina could be a bit challenging, as she tended to complain about almost everything. When Dina's first review came up, about 6 months into the job if I remember correctly, she was criticized for taking 8 to 10 hours to complete work on a particular part. The expected completion time for the task, which my wife herself had said when she used to build that part, was 6 hours. Dina wasn't happy about this and called my wife a liar, insisting that it wasn't physically possible to finish the part in that amount of time. Well, Dina's supervisor knew my wife could meet the 6-hour mark, so they set up a demonstration. My wife decided to take it a step further. Without any distractions like music, she built the part as efficiently as she could, while Dina watched. Not only did my wife prove it was possible, but she also managed to finish the part in just 4 hours, setting a new benchmark. Let's just say Dina wasn't too thrilled with the outcome and left work pretty upset that day. The third story is called Messed with the Wrong Car. I live in an apartment complex with parking on the ground floor of the building. This is my secondary residence during the weekdays, since I stay with my family a couple of hours away on weekends. My employer rented me a bigger apartment here, assuming my entire family would be staying with me. However, they don't. They live in our own house. As part of the arrangement, I've been allocated 2 parking spots in the building. Normally, I only use 1 spot, because I drive to and from work during the weekdays, leaving the other spot mostly unused. Despite this, there are plenty of parking spots available for everyone in the complex. Recently, I discovered that a neighbor had started using my second parking spot without permission, likely because it's in a better shaded area. I didn't notice this for a while, as I wasn't using the spot much. That changed when I invited my mom to stay with me for a week. She drove over in her own car, and when she arrived, she told me that someone was already parked in my second spot. I asked the security guard to look into it, and after checking, he found it was my neighbor's car. He tried calling her, but she didn't answer, so he had to go to her apartment to ask her to move her car. When she finally came down, instead of apologizing, she started arguing with the security guard. He politely explained that she needed to move her car, since it was my designated spot. After giving me a cold glare and hesitating for a bit, she finally moved her car, allowing my mom to park. My mom had been patiently waiting in her car throughout all of this. Afterward, the neighbor continued to argue with the guard, but my mom and I went back to our apartment, thinking the matter was settled. Unfortunately, when my mom was leaving a few days later, we found that her car had been badly keyed. It was heartbreaking to see her car damaged for no apparent reason other than this petty dispute. Considering the circumstances and the fact that I had good relationships with all my other neighbors, it seemed likely that the person responsible was the same neighbor who had been using my spot. I was furious. My mom had done nothing wrong, and yet her car was damaged. To address this, I decided to send a message to my neighbor. A few nights later, I left some scratches on her car's front bumper. While I was at it, I deflated 2 of her tires as well. I made sure to do this discreetly, under the guise of checking on my own car after work. The next morning, I watched from my balcony as she discovered her car's condition. She looked horrified, and I could see her panicking, because she was clearly going to be late for work. Eventually, she had to get her car towed. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction watching her deal with the inconvenience. Since then, she hasn't tried anything else, and I hope this was a lesson learned. Sometimes, actions have consequences. The last story is called Micromanaging Boss. Working under a toxic, micromanaging boss can feel like an endless test of patience. Every task, no matter how small, is subject to scrutiny. Every email is critiqued. Every idea is dismissed, unless it perfectly aligns with their vision. If you've ever been in this situation, you know the unique frustration of having your abilities questioned at every turn. That was my reality, until one day I decided enough was enough. My boss, whom we'll call Mark, was the textbook definition of a micromanager. He hovered over everyone in the office, demanded daily reports, and nitpicked them for minor issues, instead of focusing on the bigger picture. Deadlines seemed irrelevant, because Mark would rewrite everything himself anyway. Meetings felt more like interrogations, with him pacing the room and firing off questions designed to make us feel incompetent. At first, I tried to adjust. I assumed his constant interference was rooted in his own insecurities, so I increased transparency, thinking it might build trust. It didn't. Instead, it gave him more opportunities to critique. If I sent him an email about a project, he'd reply with an endless list of corrections, often making it easier to start over. If I took initiative, I'd get a lecture about following proper procedures. The breaking point came during a team presentation. I had spent weeks preparing a detailed proposal I was proud of, but less than 2 minutes into my presentation, Mark interrupted. He dismissed my work as off target and took over, presenting my slides as if they were his own. My colleagues avoided my gaze, and I stood there humiliated. That night I couldn't sleep. Mark's behavior wasn't just frustrating, it was undermining the team's morale and productivity. I realized I had 2 choices: continue to endure his tyranny, or find a way to expose the flaws in his approach. I chose the latter. Mark's greatest weakness was his need for control. He believed he was the smartest person in the room, and that the team couldn't function without his input. So I decided to turn that against him. I began following his instructions exactly, but in the most literal sense. If he asked for daily updates, I'd send exhaustive emails detailing every trivial task I completed, from organizing my desk to responding to routine emails. If he wanted to review a project, I'd include every draft, note, and supporting document I could find, making it an overwhelming amount of information. My colleagues joined in, inundating his inbox with similar updates. Mark quickly became overwhelmed. He started missing meetings and delaying feedback, because he was buried under the sheer volume of updates. The control he craved was now consuming him. One day, Mark called me into his office. He looked tired, his desk piled high with papers and reports. "This is too much," he said, rubbing his temples. "You don't need to send me every little detail." Feigning innocence, I replied, "Oh, I thought you wanted to stay on top of everything. I just wanted to make sure you had all the information you needed." He stared at me, clearly realizing he's been outmaneuvered. For the first time, I saw a flicker of humility in his expression. He mumbled something about delegating more and dismissed me. From that point on, Mark's behavior began to shift. He started loosening his grip on the team and allowing us to handle responsibilities without constant oversight. It wasn't a complete transformation. Old habits die hard, but the overwhelming flood of micromanaged details had taught him an important lesson. Control without balance leads to chaos. Working under Mark never became perfect, but it became tolerable. More importantly, I learned something valuable about myself. I learned that standing up to a difficult boss, even in subtle ways, can change the dynamic. Sometimes the best way to teach someone a lesson is to let them experience the consequences of their own behavior. If you are dealing with a toxic boss, remember this. You have more power than you might think. It's not always about direct confrontation. It's about understanding their blind spots and letting them stumble over them. Thanks for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please don't forget to leave a like, comment and subscribe. And if you have time, watch another one of my videos. Also, if you want to support me further, check out the channel membership or Patreon. And now, I hope you have a great day. See you soon. Bye bye.